In the ancient world, many cultures told stories about a monster of death that lurks in the deep, dark sea.
I guess I just want to make the case that there are dragons all over the Bible. There be dragons.
How did they be dragons?
All over.
When it comes to the world of the powers of darkness, there are certain things that are just on the table. There is disorder or chaos. Those things are 180 degrees removed from the world God created for the human family that he wanted. Leviathan was a very familiar symbol in the ancient world, not just in Israel and Canaan, but just broadly. This great dragon of the sea as being a metaphor for chaos.
What the biblical authors do, and this is what we'll do in all the episodes to follow, is take up that cultural symbolism that's very common in their day, and they tweak it and develop it and do interesting things with it. And that's where you get the variety of monster creatures.
Writers are using things that are familiar to describe spiritual threats to a human being.
And one day, there's going to be a seed from the woman, a descendant, who's going to crush you on the head while you strike him on the heel.
Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells. We believe in the power of the good news and that Jesus has defeated evil and is king of our world. We exist to help you rediscover the supernatural focus of your Bible. We believe that the supernatural focus has been suppressed, and we're here to help bring that back into the light. We do that through incredible content creation. We have mashups and interviews with some of the best scholars featuring N.T. Wright, Tim Mackey of the Bible Project, and Dr. Michael Heiser. All of this content creation supports our nonprofit ministry here at Ring Them Bells, where we provide pop-up feeding centers for the homeless and also specialize in hurricane relief. If you haven't yet, please take a second. It only takes a moment for you, but means so much for this ministry. Subscribe and turn on the alerts, as this is the best way to connect with our channel. Starting at the very beginning in Genesis and tracing all the way through Revelation, we are going to explore the theme of the Chaos Dragon. The theme of the Chaos Dragon is going to take us into the divine council worldview and the supernatural narrative that Jesus put flesh on. As always, when exploring important themes throughout the Bible, it is important to start at the beginning. Buckle up and get ready for an incredible episode and series. Stay tuned, my friends. The beginning is near.
Tanim. God created the Tanim in every living creature that moves. In Hebrew, Tanim refers to a sea creature, whether a serpent or a dragon or just a really big monster. Sometimes called Leviathan, this monster was an ancient symbol of death and disorder. The Tanim is first found in Genesis 1, and while dangerous, it does not rival the power of Creator God, who contains the Tanim in the chaotic sea. Surprisingly, violent humans can be called Tanim when they align with its destructive powers. God is described as the only one capable of defeating the Tanim, a claim that no human ruler is greater than God, and that God will one day rid creation of all death and disorder. You broke the heads of the Tanim in the waters. You crushed the heads of the Leviathan.
Go. All right, Mike. Well, we're doing 2 chapters today in Ezekiel. Is that correct?
Yep, 29 and 30.
Egypt.
Egypt. These are the first 2 of 4 chapters directed against Egypt in this section, the oracles of the nations. Let's just jump into chapter 29, and I'll read the first 5 verses just to get the ball rolling here. In the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Speak and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams, that says, My Nile is my own, I made it for myself. I will put hooks in your jaws and make the fish of your streams stick to your scales. And I will draw you up out of the midst of your streams, with all the fish of your streams that stick to your scales. And I will cast you out into the wilderness, you and all the fish of your streams. You shall fall in the open field and not be brought together or gathered. To the beasts of the earth and to the birds of the heavens I give you as food. So that's the first 5 verses. And there are a couple of things in here that are noteworthy. I think, one in particular. The reference to Pharaoh being referred to as a great dragon. And the Hebrew word lurking behind the English dragon there is Tanim. And it comes from the lemma tanin. And that should be, again, a familiar term if you've been exposed at all to what we call in Old Testament study the chaos symbolism or chaos mythology or whatever. The whole ancient Near Eastern idea, again, and ancient Israel had its own perspective on this, its own view of this, but the notion of primeval chaos, all the opposition to the kind of order that, in Israel's case, God, in the ancient Near Eastern case, the gods, wanted to create so that Earth would be habitable for human beings. So the forces of chaos, really anything that opposes that, anything that gets in the way, anything that disrupts it, and again causes upheaval on Earth. Well, Tanin, and the plural here, Tanim, is important. The reference to the Nile, again, is important. We'll get to that. We'll get to why just in a few moments. But here we have Pharaoh cast as this great dragon, again in the midst of his streams, claiming that the Nile is my own. And then we have a reference to the fish, being stuck to the scales of the great dragon. Again, if Pharaoh is the dragon, then the fish are the people. Okay, they're basically the whole point here in the first 5 verses is that Pharaoh is going to get judged, and the people of Egypt are going to get judged along with him. So it's not just him; it's everybody. The typical explanation for this language, this reference to Tanim, is that we're talking about a crocodile. Again, because of the Egyptian context, that's perfectly understandable. It's coherent. But what I'm going to suggest to you, and again, it's not just me; it's lots of Old Testament scholarship here, that there's more than just drawing an analogy to a creature that we know as the crocodile. There's that description and that picture in someone's head in the ancient world, and the terminology being used here is really going to be much more loaded. There are going to be certain concepts that glom on to this description that are very abstract and a whole lot more important than just some sort of zoological observation.
Here we are.
Hey, here we are talking about dragons.
Dragons in the Bible.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of misleading, is it? Like last time what you really showed us was there's a lot of creatures in the Bible that you could translate some of them with the word dragon. Mm-hmm. But then there's more of a theme of like chaos creatures.
Yeah, dangerous chaos creatures of the sea and of the wilderness. And there's lots of a variety of types of these animals that are connected in terms of what they mean. Uh-huh. So lions, are dark predatory creatures of the wilderness that hunt at night. And so we're crocodiles or something like that. But the one creature that has a word used to describe both the sea monster and the wilderness monster is the word nachash in Hebrew, which means snake or serpent. Uh-huh. And then there's a big vocabulary of what the water version of that creature is.
The Leviathan.
And the Tanin. Which monstrous reptilian sea creatures.
Yeah. Okay.
With multiple heads, as we'll see today. Yeah.
Cool.
So the reason why we're talking about this is it's actually a major repeated theme throughout the storyline of the Bible, starting with page 1, depending on the translation you read, but it's there in Hebrew on day 5 of creation. And all throughout, imagery of snakes and dragons and monsters is used throughout the biblical story as an image for, well, it's part of what we'll talk about right now in this conversation. And then the story of the Bible culminates with the victory over the dragon in the Revelation. So what we're going to look at is the dragon combat myth in ancient Near Eastern culture and literature. And there, the monster is primarily a sea dragon.
Okay.
What the biblical authors do, and this is what we'll do in all the episodes to follow, is take up that cultural symbolism that's very common in their day, and they tweak it and develop it and do interesting things with it. And that's where you get the variety of monster creatures that are all associated.
Okay.
But where it all started was an ancient cross-cultural mythology about the storm god fighting the sea dragon. So in the ancient Near East, and actually, as we're going to see beyond the ancient Near East, there is a really widespread symbolic narrative told across cultures that preceded the Israelites and surrounded them. And it all has the same basic plot line with the same characters. Here's the basic summary. You can go back to the oldest roots of Indian culture in Hindu religious texts.
How old are we talking?
Well, the textual versions are dated to somewhere around, I have it here in the notes, likely an oral formation period from 1900 BC through 1000 BC.
Okay.
It's a long 900-year formation history, but Abraham's cruising the promised land maybe around 1700 BC. So this is predating his migration.
These stories would have been around before.
Yep, around before. There's an ancient Hittite version that comes from around the period when Abraham and his descendants are cruising around, from the Old Kingdom period of the Hittites, around 1700 BC. There is a version of this story told by the Hurrians, which is a really unique people group, at least their languages, because it's not Indo-European or Semitic language. It's really interesting.
I'm not familiar with this crew.
Yeah, the Hurrians. But around 1500 BC, they're kind of way up in the north of Turkey. Then you have Ugarit, the ancient city of Ugarit, which it's a coastal archaeology site in Lebanon, on the coast of Lebanon. And they're around the time of Joshua and the Judges, around 1500 to 1200 BC. They have a really elaborate version of this story. And then we get to Assyria and Babylon, so Mesopotamia, and theirs is from around the same period, 1500s. So it's kind of like if you look at a pond and you can see that there's a ripple going out, you presume there's a stone.
Oh, right.
And you can kind of angle from where the ripples are back to where the center was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea of how the story spread. Is it's in all these cultures around this time period, 1900 to 1500. And so most certainly its roots go back even to the prehistoric period where all these cultures descended from.
Prehistoric meanings before any written
records.
language.
Yeah, that's right. So
we're right on the brink.
Yeah.
In the 1900 BC, right?
Yeah, well, for the alphabet.
For the alphabet.
So the hieroglyphics and the Sumerian.
That's been around for 1,000 years.
That's been around, for a much longer period. But in terms of an oral story about the storm god facing down the sea dragon, it must have lived on orally for a much longer period to have all these descendants in these very different languages and cultures.
Okay.
Because here's the basic outline of the story.
Okay.
There's a sea dragon with its minions. And
what does it usually look like?
Oh, I'll show you lots of pictures. There's lots of pictures of it. Actually, here, do you just want to do that now?
I mean, yeah, I kind of want one in my head.
Okay, got it. All right. So this is the work of Medad Ritchie that I just mentioned. She's brought together really what is the most comprehensive now collection of depictions of the sea dragon. So here's one from the late Assyrian period, and it's of the storm god carrying a bunch of lightning bolts in his hand. So really what it looks like is a long snake with crisscross scales, but it has horns. And he's
And little feet? Is that little feet?
Oh, yeah, right. Yep. 2 little tiny hands.
Little tiny
claws.
hands.
Yeah, whatever. Here is an Akkadian cylinder seal. It's also Mesopotamian. So you've got a deity with a long spear who has horns on its head, and it is piercing one of the many heads,
7 heads.
7 of them, of this 7-headed monster with 4 legs and huge spikes coming out of its back. And then there's a deity on the back kind of holding onto its tail so that the other deity can spear its head.
Okay.
Here's one from much later. This is from Greek, like a Greek vase that dates from around 600 BC. And here it's actually reflecting a Greek mythology went down into Greek culture. So Heracles and Iolaus both bashing the many heads of like a hydra.
That's what it's called in Greek mythology, a hydra?
The hydra. Yeah. And hudor is the word water in Greek. So the water monster.
Yeah.
Hydra.
And that one looks like...
Looks like a bunch of snakes coiled together as like one snake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's one that's interesting. This is Mesopotamian from a temple in a town called Nimrud from around 870 BC. And here, so you have a god Ninurta, but he looks exactly like the king of Assyria would dress. He's got lightning bolts in his hand. And what he's facing off with, you tell me what that thing looks like.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it looks kind of like, oh my gosh. This is like every animal.
Totally.
So its legs, let's start with the legs. They look like ostrich legs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then it starts to become scaly, and you get this scaly body that like turns into this crazy head.
Yep.
Kind of like what maybe like a lion would look like if it didn't have any fur.
Yep, no mane, but it has horns.
And then horns and just crazy fangs.
Yep.
It looks almost demonic.
Yeah, and then it has wings.
And it has wings.
Eagle wings.
And then it's standing up on, I guess
Yes.
I call it ostrich legs because it's like, it looks like it's standing up like a bird would, but then its hands are not bird-like. It's like almost like lion hands.
Yeah. 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 So this is going to be important when we eventually get to Daniel chapter 7.
Okay.
Which is describing monsters that sound like what this thing looks like.
This is really high fidelity. Is this like a recreation of it, or?
Let's see. Yeah, this is etched in a rock. So yeah, this is like a shaded version with high contrast.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is, so this is, again, if you were to Google like Nimrod or Ninurta battling the monster, Google will give you this image. This is a famous image. The posture of the storm god is the same as the posture of the first picture I showed you, which is from a little cylinder seal. So these are little tiny like clay seals that are in a circle. They're called cylinders. And they have a little drawing etched on all the sides. And you would roll it on clay out, and you would use it to make a decorative mark on a piece of clay or something like that. There are hundreds and hundreds of these that have surfaced. So part of Medad Ritchie's dissertation was to say that most people in the ancient world would have not read the versions of the story that I'm going to tell you about. They would have heard the story.
And seen pictures.
But more, they would just know it by seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Seeing it on letters.
Wow.
Seeing it on temples. Seeing it, like what, billboards.
This is their medium.
For us. Yeah, yeah. So this was one of the iconic, popular tales of the ancient Eastern world. Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about.
We need your help. Ring Them Bells is a nonprofit organization where every dollar donated goes right back into the mission of spreading the good news and helping those in need. The main ministry of Ring Them Bells is serving those in need in the name of our King Jesus. Over the past year, we have fed over 2,000 meals. And next year, we want to double that. We can't do this without your support. Everything we create here and all of the food that we serve is free because it's paid for by generous viewers just like you. If you feel led to donate and join the mission with us here at Ring Them Bells, click the Give Butter link in the notes and comments of this video. If you can't support us financially, please continue to like and share the content, as this helps us so much with spreading the good news about what Jesus has done for our world. Where I want you to go is a place that we're literally smack in the middle of right now with a series going over the Chaos Dragon. So Leviathan, I'd love for you to spend some time there and go over why biblical authors utilize this mythological creature. I have another video. It's from the Bible Project. I shortened it down. This is an amazing one. I want to watch this together with you, and then I want you to help us understand this mythological creature of Leviathan.
Many cultures told stories about a monster of death that lurks in the deep, dark sea.
On the first page of the Bible, God brings order by separating the dry land from the chaotic sea, and there he contains the sea dragon. And this monster is connected to that dragon-like snake that confronts Adam and Eve in the garden. A spiritual being using the power of chaos and death to lure humans into their own self-destruction. Biblical authors also use dragon imagery to describe violent human kings, like Pharaoh, who enslaved and murdered the ancient Israelites. Even the famous Goliath, the details of his armor and weapons depict him as a scaly, snaky giant. In fact, entire empires can become like dragons. During Israel's exile in Babylon, the prophet Daniel has a dream about 4 monstrous beasts rising up out of the sea. They represent violent kingdoms in league with dark spiritual powers. But then, a new character appears, rising up from the land to sit beside God's throne. And as the dream ends, Daniel sees those monsters destroyed.
So who is this dragon slayer?
Well, Daniel calls him one like a son of man.
The Son of Man. That's what Jesus calls himself.
Yes, in fact, the gospel authors depict Jesus confronting the dragon in many ways. Like when he tramples over the stormy sea. Or when he resists the tempter in the wilderness. Or when he overcomes death and sickness in others. Jesus resists the dragon in a surprising way. He surrenders his life and willingly enters the belly of the beast. But Jesus trusted in God's power to create new life on the other side of chaos and death. And he called his followers to confront the dragon in the same way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like you said, man, I love the Bible Project. They are incredible at what they do. So we're right in the middle of a series going over the Chaos Dragon, Leviathan.
It's a great series. I've gone through it. It's great.
It's awesome. I love it. So respond to that clip and help us see why Leviathan or the Chaos Dragon was such an important figure to biblical authors.
Yeah, well, this is a journey for me because it's interesting. I'm thankful you bring it up because for me, Leviathan, as a creative and as an imagination creator, Leviathan was one of the big doorways that helped me to really begin to understand this imagination that goes throughout the biblical text. So much so that I've written a book. Look, I'm an author, so I got to pitch my books.
Yes.
Called Leviathan and Behemoth, Giant Chaos Monsters of the Bible. It's a short booklet, so it's not that expensive, but it goes through all this theology. And essentially, when you do study these various passages, you got to go more than Job, 41 or whatever, where it describes Leviathan. There's so many other references to it that help you to fill out the full picture and make you realize he's not just describing a dinosaur or even just a sea monster as a generic symbol of monstrousness and he's greater than the monster. No, it's an actual ancient Near Eastern motif of chaos. I'm going to go through one example myself. That's my favorite example, but Leviathan was the creature that represents chaos. And I've mentioned this already, but the main principle is order versus chaos, another ancient Near Eastern motif in the Bible as well. And so the chaos monster, the sea dragon, is connected to the sea, and the sea is often used as well as a symbol of the chaos. Sometimes they even use the desert as a symbol of chaos. But just in general, the sea and the sea dragon, and of course the surrounding cultures of the day, particularly the Canaanite culture, had a very similar myth about Baal, the storm god, conquering the seas and conquering Leviathan, as they called it. They had a different Ugaritic word, but it was the same word, Leviathan, and to rise to become king of his council. The idea is that in the ancient world, the way of and by the way, I don't even think that they believe these as literal stories, but they were literal myths or symbols or metaphors for what they believed in, which was our God, whatever God they worshiped. Our God is the God of the storm who suppresses the chaos of the world around us. You know, you look at the ocean and it's chaos, man, like dark, deep storms we have no power over. It's chaos. Well, our God suppresses, controls that chaos and creates his order. And for the Hebrews, the order was their covenant order, right? Sinai, this is my order. These are my laws. This is how you will live. That is God's covenanted order that he creates and out of the chaos and establishes it. And so the sea dragon's part of that chaos. It's a creative expression of that. So my personal favorite, there's many passages, but mine is Psalm 74. And that if you look at that passage, it's talking creatively and it's making references to the Red Sea deliverance. And there's a reason why. It says in Psalm 74:12 and onward, "Yet God my King is from of old." Now this is what I think David writing, but he's hearkening back to the Red Sea. And he says, "Working salvation in the midst of the earth. You, Yahweh, divided the sea by your might." Okay, there it is. There's him dividing the Red Sea. But again, this is our God conquers the sea. "You broke the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan." Crush the heads. There it is. Leviathan is a serpentine creature. There it is. That motif, crushing the head of the serpent. But it also says heads, plural. And this was the thing that blew my mind, because I know that, ancient Ugarit believed that the Leviathan had 7 heads. There's a lot of stories in mythology that have the sea dragon with 7 heads or multiple heads, right? And this one, even the Bible is saying that Leviathan had multiple heads. Wow, that's a whole nother thing. So in my storyline of Chronicles, of all my Chronicle stories, the sea dragon of chaos, Leviathan, in the supernatural realm is a part of all the stories. Why? Because even though God is establishing his created order, there's always that element of chaos in the world that has to be fought. And so it never goes away until the final end, right? So I that's why Leviathan became my personal favorite image in the Bible, because of everything that he represents and how God conquers it. Anyway, it says, you, Yahweh, gave Leviathan as food for the creatures of the wilderness. So he's crushing its heads. And this is, again, linked to the parting of the Red Sea. So we're going to see why. And this motif of giving him as food to the creatures of the wilderness. Why wilderness? I thought they're in the sea. Well, this is another thing where you study the concept, and it's throughout the Bible, where there's this motif of God killing the chaos monster and giving him as food a victory. Well, sometimes it's the birds of the air eat them, sometimes it's human kings eat them, but the idea is you're eating the flesh of the enemy chaos, right? It's metaphorical. And it says, "You split open springs and brooks, you dried up the ever-flowing streams. Yours, Yahweh, is the day, yours the night, etc. You have fixed the boundaries of the earth. You've established the lights in the sun, etc." And so what's going on is here, he's describing the Red Sea deliverance, and he's saying, you're crushing the heads of Leviathan, the sea dragon of chaos. Why? What's going on? You're bringing your people through the chaos. And of course, like the Bible Project video said, even Pharaoh is sometimes likened to a Leviathan or the serpentine creature, a pharaoh of a different time period. But the point is he's used as a symbol of oppression. Yeah. And so you could even say that this is an expression of God suppressing Egypt and Pharaoh, bringing his people out of that chaos of Egypt. Where did they go next? To Sinai, where they got the law. And he establishes his covenant, which is the order that is established out of that chaos that they came out of. That's the metaphor that's going on here. But there's another component that, again, is throughout the text. I too like the Bible Project because they deal with these themes, and I do think there's a thematic notion of all these things. But that last language that I read about, you establish the heavenly lights, you fix the boundaries of the earth. This is all creation language. So he's describing as if he's creating the heavens and earth. What's that about? This is another motif where the creation of the heavens and the earth is a metaphor for the creation of the covenant. So a lot of times the language of heavens and earth that you're reading, it's not about the literal heavens and earth. It's about the covenant, the cosmos that God created. His covenant order with his people is described as a heavens and earth. So much so that when in Jeremiah, when the temple is destroyed in the exile, it's described as the event by Jeremiah is described as if the earth is going back to its pre-created chaos. It's literally using the language of Genesis 1, formless and void. The earth is formless and void. There are no humans on the land. There are no animals. And he's describing the destruction of the temple as if it's the destruction of the cosmos. And that's what this heavens and earth collapsing universe language is pointing to. You have to be careful when you're studying this concept of the heavens and the earth, because it's a very strong covenantal reference point that they often use. So what was the covenant that was established when he brought them through the Red Sea? The covenant of Moses, which is the Torah.
I love that. There is so much there to really, I don't know, just grab onto, man, that just gives you hope and connection, that the interconnectedness of this book, right? Like, it's like, first off, I always say, like, the Bible ninja masters that wrote this, like, I give credit to humanity, because, like, it's a inspired text by the Spirit of God, but he used humans. And whoever put these things together and wove these stories together, and the interconnectedness and the parallels and all the themes and how they weave together, it constantly has me in awe of the God that we serve. And just what you said there is another level to that. The Bible is, we always say, is in constant conversation with culture. And it's important to always remember that the people that wrote this text, whether Old Testament or New Testament, were people that were under the boot of empire. They were the ones being oppressed. They were under the Babylonian Empire, the Syrian Empire, the Roman Empire. They were constantly being oppressed by these empires, and the text that they wrote, the Hebrew scriptures that Jesus put flesh on, are constantly speaking a word against these empires that had their boot on them, and they incorporated their own languages, their own themes, their mythical creatures, the Leviathan, and like you said, redeemed these concepts in the ideas of scripture that they are subordinate to the one true God, Yahweh.
Let's get into the abstract stuff, with that bit of an introduction. You have several things in the passage that sort of scream to scholars, again, this symbolic, mythopoetic sort of context for what's going on here. Number one, you have the proximity of this material to Ezekiel 28. Okay, here we are right in the next chapter. And you had plenty of, again, cosmic references, again, various, divine stories from Canaan, and a few other parts too. But you have a very, very clear mythopoetic bent in Ezekiel 28 that says, hey, we're talking about a historical figure here, but lurking in the background are these religious theological things that have to do with the divine council and cosmic rebellion and all this stuff. So you have here chapter 29 right on the heels of that. And we've seen this at other places in the book of Ezekiel. But that's one thing that leads scholars to think, okay, we're just getting more of the same. It's just that now it's directed against Egypt. Before it was the Prince of Tyre, now it's against Egypt. You also have following chapters 31 and 32, which when we get there, it's going to be abundantly clear that there's something going on there in this, again, kind of mythopoetic, cosmic worldview sort of thing. So the fact that here you have chapter 29 right between those two things, again, scholars are thinking, well, the context argues for this. Secondly, the word Tanim, again, the lemma Tanin is important. We'll see in a moment why, because I'm going to take you to some other passages. The line about the hook in the jaw is important, because that's going to show up in other passages where the great dragon, Leviathan, who is called Tanin, is going to be discussed. And Leviathan is perhaps the most well-known chaos symbol in antiquity. And then fourth, the notion of being cast into the wilderness to be given as food for land-dwelling animals and birds is another thing that pops up in episodes or passages where Leviathan is discussed. When Leviathan is judged, he is handed over again to the other beasts to, so they can pick its carcass, that kind of thing. So those four observations, when scholars read these first 5 verses, again, just scream to them, okay, we're going to have some sort of mythopoetic context here, some sort of wider abstract religious worldview at work in this passage. It's not just about, hey, there's a crocodile that we're just going to take that big beast and we're going to sort of analogize Pharaoh to that thing. It's more than zoology here. So let's talk about Tanim, and of course the lemma is Tanin with an N. It appears in Deuteronomy 32:33, for instance, and I'll just read it to you. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of asps. Okay, if you cut out to that passage, the word there for serpents there is Tanim. Okay, Tananim in that case. But here you have a parallel. Now notice the parallel. You have this word for dragon in parallel with another word clearly for serpent. In that case, it's going to be the asp, which is a different term than nakash. In this case, it's peten is the lemma. Again, a common word for a serpent, an asp, a type of snake in the Bible. But you have, again, the dragon in parallel with this, this particular snake. So it could be, and again, it often is, that dragon here would have been conceived by the ancient person as a serpent-like creature. The serpentine idea is clear from the encounter with the Egyptian magicians. Remember, Moses and Aaron goes in before Pharaoh. They go in there and they confront Pharaoh in Exodus 7, verses 9 and following. Well, if we read verse 9, it says, God tells Moses, when Pharaoh says to you, prove yourselves by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh that it may become a serpent. Okay, believe it or not, that's Tanim right there. Same thing for verse 12, same chapter. Again, the confrontation with Pharaoh. So again, this term, this dragon term, which everybody says, oh, that's a crocodile because it lives in the Nile. Well, okay, it could be, it might be, because there's not just one description of the great sea creature that is the symbol of chaos, the symbol of hostility to Yahweh's good order. Okay, there's no one way of telegraphing that. But in some of these, there is a very distinct, again, serpentine flavor to the context. And I'm harping on this for a specific reason that I'll mention in a bit. Tanim is also used of saltwater creatures, Job 7:12. So it's not always, fresh water. We read here, am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me? Job 7:12, sea monster there in the ESV is Tanim. Now, I'm going to go to Isaiah 51:9, where I think the most significant connection here is made, because this is going to help us go to a couple other passages. But in Isaiah 51:9, again, we're talking about this dragon motif. Again, what people in the ancient world would have thought when they either hear preached or they read in a text Tanim. Again, they're going to be thinking some very specific things that relate to just why the world is the way it is. Why is it chaotic? Why is there upheaval? Why is there disorder? Surely God wouldn't make the world this way on purpose. Okay, well, there are forces at work against the way things God wants it to be. And that's where you get the concept of chaos. So in Isaiah 51:9, we read this. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahav in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Now again, note the parallel there. Dragon, Tanim, is in parallel to Rahav. Okay, verse 10. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? Obviously, that's a reference to the Exodus, crossing over the great deep. Well, the great deep here is where the dragon lived. It's where Rahav lived. And in Isaiah 51, God is judging Rahav. He's judging the dragon by drying up the sea, okay? Now, if you take that back, to Ezekiel 29, again, we have the dragon in the Nile, and God says in verse 5, I will cast you out into the wilderness, and you and all the fish of your stream, I'm going to empty that thing out. You're going to be, essentially put on dry land. The beasts of the earth and the birds of the heavens are going to pick your carcass, that sort of thing. So keep all these things in mind. Let's go to Isaiah 30, verse 17. Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Therefore I have called her Rahav, who sits still. Again, Rahab, the same word as in Isaiah 51, where it's paralleled with this, with the dragon. Again, part of the matrix of terms that speak of chaos. Well, why? What's the point of God sort of making fun of Egypt here by calling her Rahab, who sits still? Well, basically because you don't have the power to do anything. You're not a threat. Okay, you might as well just sit on your butt over there in the corner because you're not doing anything. You're sort of feckless or useless. Again, you're impotent is the idea. You're not active. Okay, you're not a force to be reckoned with. Let's go to Psalm 89. This is a divine counsel passage. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings, the B'nai Elim, is like the Lord, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him? O Lord, God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you? You could also translate that your faithful ones all around you, in a council reference. You rule the raging of the sea. In other words, you are greater than the powers of chaos. The sea and the creatures, of course, living in it, like this great sea monster dragon, super sea serpent kind of thing. Okay, those were symbols of something not under control. Why? Because the sea was unmanageable. It was unpredictable. It was threatening. Okay, but the Lord, God, is stronger than the sea. He is the one who calms the waters. He is the one in control of them. He is the one who puts the sea under restraint in the creation narratives. So verse 9 again, Psalm 89. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. You crushed Rahab like a carcass. You scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. The heavens are yours. The earth also is yours. The world and all that is in it, you have founded them. The north and the south, you have created them. Tabor and Hermon joyously praise your name. You have a mighty arm, strong is your hand, high your right hand. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. And here you have a reference to the God of the council, Yahweh, the Lord of the council, subduing, crushing, bringing, into restraint Rahab, again, the great sea beast, the forces of chaos. He stills the seas, he stills the waves, and he crushes Rahab like a carcass. Psalm 74, yet God my King is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters. There's our word Tanim, on the waters, because you broke the heads of the sea monsters, the Tanim on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. Okay, right there it is. The same kind of language that we see right here in Ezekiel 29, where God is judging, God is crushing, God is destroying. There's a number of words here. God is, again, overpowering the Tanim. He is overpowering Leviathan. He is mightier than the forces who work against him. Again, and the way this is portrayed in biblical thinking is the raging sea. This is the primary metaphor for all of the forces that frighten us, threaten us, oppose the order that God imposed in creation. Okay, when there are problems, it's viewed as sort of an eruption of the forces, of nature. And again, this is why, when you had natural disaster, when you had things like this, it was viewed as in cosmic terms, that this is just symptomatic of the fact. Now catch this. This is symptomatic of the fact, all this bad stuff that happens, again, either in the natural world, natural disasters, or we are reminded of by the threat, by the fearsomeness of the world we live in. It just reminds us that our world is not Eden. Our world is not the way God originally wanted it to be.
the opening, there's two narratives that begin the Bible. There's the 7-day creation narrative, and then there's the 1-day creation narrative. And, the fact that they work on different timelines and people have all kinds of different ways of working out the differences between them. The first narrative begins with a description of the pre-creation state, which doesn't really fit our modern ways of talking about the origins of the universe, but it made perfect sense to the biblical authors in their cultural context. And the pre-creation state is described as formless and void, or in Hebrew, tohu vavohu, wild and waste, a desolate wilderness. And then the second line in Genesis 1 verse 2 is a scene of darkness over the face of deep, abysmal waters. So a desert, which are typically characterized by the absence of water. And then in the next line, darkness over way too much water. Are you with me? And it's two images that just sit there that seem in tension on the surface level, but they're two ways of talking about the same reality, which is the biblical author's way of talking about non-existence, disorder, and chaos. And so the rest of the 7-day narrative takes up that second image of the dark chaos waters, and then it's about God splitting the waters and parting them. The second narrative, which begins in Genesis 2, verse 4, takes up that image of the world. Trust me, this is all an answer to the question. Takes up the narrative, and it begins creation over again, but telling the story of creation beginning with a desolate wilderness, Genesis 2, verse 4. And man, nothing can grow there, and there's no humans, and there's no farming, and there's no rain. Game over. It's like a non-starter. But just like God's breath entered the darkness and began separating, so in this story, God provides water that turns that dirt into mud and the clay, and then he forms the human and he brings his breath to it, and you get humans. Okay. So what's interesting is in both of those stories, the depictions of chaos and disorder in the pre-creation state are that of a desolate wilderness and that of darkness and chaos waters. And then as you get on into the rest of the biblical story, those become primary images to talk about how creation, when it's handed over to human evil and folly, we're either constantly reducing creation back into a form of chaotic flood or desolation and wilderness. And so when Adam and Eve are exiled from the garden, they go from the garden back into the wilderness where they die. Like the flood, like God creates out of the waters and then he decreates by letting the waters come back over creation. And so desolate wilderness and dark chaotic waters are the primary images of death, disorder, and chaos. And so for a long time, when I was introduced to what the story of Christianity and the Bible was all about, it was a way of telling the story of the Bible that went like this. Everything was created to be perfect. Humans give in to sin and death, and make it all bad and terrible. And through Jesus, everything is going to be perfect again one day. You guys tracking with me? It's a very common way of retelling the story. The problem with that retelling of the story is the Bible. Because that's not how the story begins. It doesn't begin perfect. It begins with darkness and disorder and chaos. And out of that state of chaos, God doesn't make something that's perfect. He makes something that is 7 times over called, in Genesis 1, it's called good. And I'm pretty sure good doesn't mean perfect. Good means good, yeah? But perfect means complete. And so the way the biblical authors tell the story is God brought order and goodness out of chaos. But then when he puts the human in the garden, in proximity to his own life, what that is an opportunity for good to become complete. And that is an opportunity that is forfeited and never realized in the biblical story because they make the dumb choice, and they go where? They go out into the wilderness, and then it ends up in a flood again. Are you with me? So in other words, the resolution to the biblical story, Jesus comes onto the scene not to restore a perfection that was lost, but it's actually to reclaim a future and a destiny that has never been experienced by any human before. Are you tracking with me? And so, sorry, what I'm talking about is the overall, how we imagine the story that we're living in. So I think within Jesus' imagination, when he encounters suffering and pain, it's not, well, we live in a world that fell from perfection and God's trapped us here where we're all suffering. And man, if he was just nicer to us, he would let us at least, give us some air and give us some, right? I mean, this story tends toward a portrait of God, that he kicked us out of the good place and he's keeping us down here and we're suffering. And if he was nicer to us, he might give us some relief. And that's not how the biblical story works. The biblical story works is that we live in a good world, but man, it is not complete. And the problem is that we keep, through our own folly and believing the lies of that snake, keep giving ourselves and our communities and creation over to chaos and disorder. Are you tracking with me? And so the death and the suffering that's in our world within that frame of the biblical story is exactly what it's the natural course of all creation. If God doesn't create, it's just the way things are, desolate and wilderness. And so I think I'm trying to wrap my mind around that way of telling the story. And if that wasn't very clear, it's because I'm still trying to find a way to articulate it. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We're
okay.
with you.
Yeah, totally. But I think the point is that within that way of telling the biblical story, which I think is actually the way it's trying to present itself to us, suffering and death is about God's good creation being dragged back into a state of disorder and chaos. And what Jesus is doing is rescuing people from the chaos and opening up a way to the reunion of heaven and earth and to completion once again. And it's just another way that helps us begin to imagine evil and suffering within a different kind of story.
Going back to the very beginning of this conversation, when God creates creatures in these realms, so in the waters, it's the sea dragon.
Mm-hmm.
In the night sky, it's the host of heaven.
Yeah, the stars. Yeah.
And
which bring God's light to the darkness.
Yeah.
In a very ordered pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
But what we do have with the stars is a backstory of sorts of going, well, why is there a force of decreation that's like a creature? Well, you get a story of, I guess maybe this isn't clear in the Bible, but maybe in Second Temple literature, where you get the story of the fallen angel or the...
Oh, I see. Well, you get it within the Hebrew Bible itself.
Okay.
Yeah, but specifically from the prophets, Isaiah and Ezekiel. But what they're doing is they're looking back on those inhabitants, on the stars and on the dragon and on the snake, and they see there a mirror of what has been happening in the story of the human rulers.
Uh-huh.
So the human rulers wanted more. They wanted more power, more wisdom, sooner and by their own schemes, whereas God wanted to give it to them, but by his own timing and his own wisdom. And so they see that story being played out in the human realm, resulting in lots of death and chaos. And they share with us the mirror narrative of the snake's downfall, and which is also the downfall of a star. And so that's what's so interesting in Isaiah, is that the big cosmic bad guy is used as an analogy story for the king of Babylon. So the king of Babylon can be likened to a star falling from heaven because it tried to go up higher.
Right.
And then it also can be likened to the snake in the waters that'll get his head chopped off.
And the point is to say there's something deeper. There's a deeper force animating Nebuchadnezzar.
When humans unleash death and chaos on the land, we are actually participating in a much more substantial, or a cosmic power of decreation that's opposed to where God is trying to take the world. Resist the temptation to use the violent, destructive ways of the dragon. And also, don't be afraid of it. Jesus' victory over the beast has created a way to escape its power. And trust in the power of God, who will one day defeat the dragon once and for all.
If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, share, turn on the alerts for this channel. All those things help us get the message out about what God has done for this world. And we're so excited to have you here along for the journey. This is a community, and I've loved having all the response and all the connection that I've had with you guys across the globe. So thankful you're here. Tune in. Stay tuned, as we always say. The beginning is near. We've got more coming. See you soon.